Three Fires Confederacy, the Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe. We also recognize that this land is now home to the Delaware Nation. This land was settled through the McKee Purchase Treaty of 1790, and we, as beneficiaries of the treaty, must recognize our responsibilities, including our collective responsibilities to the land and water.
Any disclosures of pecuniary interest, direct or indirect? Seeing none. Again, I want to welcome everyone to our first budget deliberation meeting for this year. I want to thank everyone in the public that participated in the open houses, that provided feedback through email to budget committee members. I want to thank staff for all the work that they've done to this point over the past few months, over the past year, and thank all committee, all members of council for working through these budget binders and bringing your best to these meetings. So I'm hopeful we'll have a spirited and interesting meeting this evening that will treat each other with respect that we always do, and that will make sure we're prioritizing investment in our community so that we can meet the challenges that we face today. So with that, I will move to presentation of new information.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. So I'll just ask for the slides to be forwarded. So over half the municipalities with strong mayor powers have released their proposed budget for 2025. The average tax increase across all of the proposed budgets is 5.68. When we take a closer look at the strong mayor power municipalities surrounding Chatham-Kent, there's an average increase to the tax levy of 6.08%, and this includes the City of London, City of Windsor, Sarnia, and Chatham-Kent. Chatham-Kent falls below this average of the surrounding municipalities and slightly above the provincial average. So during last year's 2024 multi-year budget deliberations, Council decreased the proposed 2025 infrastructure funding of 3.34% by over 0.5%. Council ultimately approved a 2.82% or $5.6 million increase in infrastructure funding for 2025. On October 31st of this year, the municipality received the good news that there would be nearly $2.3 million increase in the province that is funding for Chatham-Kent for the Ontario Municipal Partnership funding. We had previously been expecting that we'd actually receive a decrease in our OMPF funding. It is recommended through this year's annual budget update that $1.7 million of this increased OMPF funding go towards reducing the infrastructure inflation budget requests. This will decrease the infrastructure funding outlined in the previous slide even further. The remaining $600,000 in OMPF funding is recommended to be split between the November 4th yard waste grinding contract and a one-time transfer to the Affordable Housing Reserve. As a result of last year's multi-year budget deliberations and by applying the recommended OMPF funding, 2025's infrastructure funding ask would be less than $4 million, coming in at 1.98%. As well as the recommended changes due to the OMPF funding, another addition was introduced at the November 18th council meeting to be referred to the budget update. This addition is to have $85,000 in annual tax-based funding be provided to the Chatham-Kent Family Physician Recruitment and Retention Task Force to support the physician recruitment. In summary, it's recommended that the previously assumed $350,000 reduction in OMPF funding from last year be removed from the 2025 update. That $1.7 million base funding be applied to the infrastructure AMP inflation. That $93,000 base funding go towards the yard waste grinding contract from the November 4th council report. That $494,000 go to the Affordable Housing Reserve one time. And that $85,000 be added to the base budget for the Chatham-Kent Family Physician Recruitment and Retention Task Force.
Okay, so any questions about that and anyone that would like to move those recommendations? Councillor Harrigan?
No questions, but I'm happy to move those recommendations, Budget Chair.
Seconded by Councillor Finn. Any questions about that update or about that motion to accept the recommendations that are up on the screen? Seeing none, I will call the vote.
Councillor McGrail?
Yes.
Thank you. All votes are in. Motion passes 18-0.
Our next items are anything related to capital budget, capital new, and capital asset management plan. Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, whereas there are 3,385 kilometers of roads in the municipality of Chatham-Kent, which includes 1,550 kilometers of asphalt roads, 210 kilometers of surface-treated tar and trip roads, and 1,785 kilometers of gravel roads. And whereas council approved the gravel road conversion program in order to reduce the number of gravel roads and will result in upgraded rural transportation networks. And whereas there are 9.27 kilometers in the short term and over 80 kilometers of road in the long-term recommendations for gravel road conversions, that the life cycle gravel level of service be modified by extending the application of gravel on every roads from on average every 3 years to once every 4 years, and that 1 million of the savings be allocated as a base budget to the gravel roads conversion program to prioritize an increase in the number of gravel road conversions on a yearly basis, and that $650,000 be utilized to reduce the 2025 tax rate. And if I get a seconder, I can explain.
Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that we've kind of come across some different ideology and logic in the municipality when it comes to our infrastructure team, and I think that now that we have a good grasp on a conversion program, a lot of the issues that I hear on a regular basis from our rural, our high-traveled rural areas is that they really want to have their roads upgraded. And I also hear concerns about the amount of, the type of gravel, and that there is some concerns in regards to how often it is put on, when it's put on, in different areas. I think with Mr. Soldo's team and having this program in place, this is a way that we can better invest into our rural communities to provide them a better transportation network, and in basically have long savings of costs moving forward. And I'm sure that there'll be a lot of questions from council, and I completely understand this is a very challenging year this year, but I think that this is a way that we can invest into our rural community for longer term. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Councillor Story.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would this motion have any impact on the other reduction in services related to the lack of treatment on the roads? Are those two connected at all?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, Councillor, but I would say that this is really a separate alternate motion in terms of how we maintain the level of service on our roads. And we'd be going from 3 years to 4 years in terms of the gravel application. It is an alternative method of maintaining and I would say improving the level of service on the gravel roads. By extending it, you're at the same time accelerating the gravel road conversion program, which does provide a better overall level of service to rural residents. It also allows more roads to be converted to a paved service, reduces the need for what I call constant gravel grading. As well, it does provide an effective solution to dust control along those converted roads.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, and through the chair. I have concerns with this because not all our gravel roads are the same. We don't use the same aggregate on all of our roads, and some of our roads can maybe withstand 4 years. Some maybe can withstand 2, maybe some even 1, let alone having a 3-year average. So I know that working, and I understand the basis of this, and it all looks good, but it looks good on paper, it looks good here, but I think that until we can continue to look at individual needs on individual roads that some have higher problems. I know that with the road conversion and that is a good basis to move forward, but that's going to take a fair amount of time. And in the meantime, the service is going to decline on many roads if it goes to a 4-year conversion. You had mentioned, Edward, through here just about the dust suppressant. I'm assuming that this is not part of this, because when we get to that point, I plan to move to put that back into the budget. Because having lived on a gravel road for 35 years, I've seen the benefits of dust suppressant throughout the years and over the years on the gravel roads. And I've done a ton of reading this week on different websites trying to better understand what the effect would be by removing that. So I'm not sure I can support this unless I better understand it. And I need to be assured that if some roads were converted to 4 years, maybe I could understand that, because I do know there are a lot of roads that don't get utilized on a high use basis. But there are other roads that can barely get through a year to 2 years before they need to be re-gravelled. So I guess I need to understand it better. I'm not sure whether I can support it. Thanks.
Edward?
Thank you. Through the budget chair, I'll start, and I'm sure Ryan will elaborate if necessary. The key here is on average. So you're correct, Councilor McGregor. Some roads require more attention and a shorter time frame. Others don't require that attention, right? So some roads we're out there every 2 years, and some roads we're out there every 6 years. So it's really about moving the average. We'll still deal with roadways that require that higher level of service in a shorter time frame, like we do now. We always have to maintain the gravel roads to ensure that we're meeting the minimum maintenance standards. So the key here is really the word average. Some roads will still be getting it more often. Others will just take a little longer. Some can go longer than 4 years overall.
Okay, thank you. That helps very much. And this motion does not identify the use of calcium and putting calcium down on our roads on an annual basis, correct?
That's a separate issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I have Councillor Harrigan, followed by Councillor McGrail.
Thank you. Do we have a reference document around like the standards for what requires gravel to be placed on roads or replaced on roads? Because I know sometimes I often will just direct residents to put in a ticket at info@CK or through the 311 system. But do staff go through an evaluation process for that?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair, for the question. So there isn't specific standards for how often you should gravel the roads. Like unlike our minimum maintenance standards, which outline pothole size and things like that, one of the big consideration is as gravel wears out, or depending on the type of gravel, it was said some of the limestone breaks down quicker. If you don't do that, you get potholes. And so that's where kind of the timing, as was mentioned, can come into play, that if you have busy roads that are breaking down quicker, they need gravel quicker. And our obligation is under the MMS. And so it's really historically been up to our road supervisors working with our public works managers about, this is a busy road, it's getting gravel every year. This is a road where we may have not graveled in 10 years. It's like a dead end section, but they review that every year. But I would say the general are on this 3-year cycle as before, and this motion is proposing to go to 4. And basically we'll be left with a budget and we'll have to prioritize what needs it the most.
And maybe if I could just add, in terms of those busier roads, those are really the targets for the gravel road conversion. When we came to council with that report, identified those that are missing links, those that are really higher traffic volume roadways, and by converting them, we'll have less of a maintenance cost and have to go back there with the grading and dealing with the potholes, as Ryan had indicated.
Thank you.
Councillor McGrail.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Edward or Ryan, I guess I'm looking for, through experience and expertise, will our service levels be consistent with this motion, or will it decrease? as in, because we do have a lot of gravel roads, and I understand, there are certain roads that we are looking towards to convert, but the existing roads, I have a lot of issues and a lot of complaints about gravel roads. Will this motion decrease service that we're used to right now?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Budget Chair. I would say to you that this is a better overall level of service that we'd be providing to the rural residents by allowing us to convert more of the roadways, especially those higher traffic volume ones. We'll get a lot less complaints because, more traffic on a particular road and more complaints you get as you get more of those potholes. And our goal really is to maintain the existing level of service utilizing this schedule on those lower volume roads and dealing with them from a minimum maintenance perspective. So overall, I would say this is a better transition and improving the level of service on the gravel roads.
This moment in time, and as we get closer to, actually improving roads, there is a little bit of a sacrifice. Am I right to say that?
I don't think I would agree with that. I would say as we, we're still maintaining them every 3 to 4 years, and you're not going to see that degradation by going by one additional year. You're not going to see a massive degradation there.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I appreciate everyone's questions and staff's comments to this. I think I'm wrapping my head around it a lot more now. But I guess just anytime you talk about life cycle and capital projects, maybe just in the short term with this, if we pass this motion, what does 2025 look like? Is there anything that gets bumped? Is there anything on a list, any projects that were kind of planned that aren't going to happen now in 2025 as a result to doing this?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. So what will happen, we put out the gravel tender annually. So we usually put it out in January and we put in maps for the contractor of what roads we're going to do. And we also put in the tonnage that we're going to be purchasing. So with this motion, we will know we have X budget, and we will have to reduce the roads from, say, a third to a quarter, adding into the road supervisor's comments. A good example is second concession line. We're currently would, maybe get gravel every 3 or 4 years, but because of the increased traffic in years past, we've had to do it annually. So these are the kind of changes that road supervisors and my managers have been looking at. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, if council remembers, 2 years ago, there was funding put aside for the gravel road conversion and geotechnical work on all the gravel roads. And so Marissa Mascaro could comment a little more, but we have done 1 year of that already, and we are doing that program. And the idea is to get quantitative data as opposed to qualitative data from my road supervisor about what needs it. So we have done about 10% or maybe under of that work already and gotten in some results. And so over time, we may have some better, numbers to plan with about which roads are the busiest, which ones actually have good gravel bases, and which ones could use a little more gravel on them to improve their quality. So that is a program that council previously approved that is underway. And so for this year, it will be a reduction in tonnage, and Public Works will have to split it in the priorities we have.
If I could just add there, that it'll be a reduction in tonnage, but it'll actually be a doubling of the roads in the next 3 years that we can convert, because our current base budget's $1 million in the gravel road conversion, and this would give us an additional $1 million, which would be doubling the amount of work that we can do in terms of the conversion strategy.
Okay, so essentially what you're saying, Edward, we will be able to, with this motion and with these programs and moving forward with this, we'll be able to, take care of more roads next year and moving forward.
Yeah, we will be able to convert more roadways, and especially those higher order ones where we have a lot more traffic.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Wright, followed by Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Isn't it going to increase the maintenance on the roads a lot, taking the gravel away? Like the roads are hardly got any gravel left on the top of them now. Right now, the roads are in bad shape. We don't have 1 or 2 potholes. We got thousands of them out there where I am. I've spent about 100 kilometers the last 3 days driving the roads, and they're just horrible. I think taking the gravel away, we're gonna have more potholes.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I'm sorry, which was the question?
Well, by taking the gravel away, are we not gonna increase more potholes?
So the reason we gravel roads is to try to keep a good quality surface, to minimize those pothole issues. Over time, some of the gravel sinks in, and so it's that replenishment on top. But I think the comments and the ideology behind this motion is, let's start spending more money on gravel road conversion and less on the re-graveling. One of the things our study has shown is some roads we've analyzed already do have quite a substantial base and would be good candidates for tar and chip. And so will we have to prioritize which ones are the worst and which ones are going to get gravel? There'll be a little change to that. But over time, and even immediately, as the councillor pointed out, it will double our gravel road conversion program to try to address those major needs roads first.
But aren't we gonna be spending more money surfacing the gravel back up, grading all the time?
So we will have to grade in accordance with the MMS. And I a 25% change to this, I don't see a huge increase. But when we get complaints, we inspect, and once we have our forces and the time of the year, we'll have to be grading all the roads anyway, regardless of how much gravel is on them.
And maybe if I could just add, if council recalls in the report that we brought a couple weeks ago, in terms of gravel road conversion strategy, we're also looking at, as Ryan indicated, the consultant had gone out and looked at the various roadways, and one of the issues identified really was some of the maintenance strategies. So we have put aside $200,000 to help improve the drainage on those roadways, and that's really the driving factor behind potholes. Water stays on the road, and that's what really causes the potholes. So separate from all of this, we have a new line item that provides $200,000 to improving drainage roadways, which will help with the whole issue related to potholes.
Councillor Doyle?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I'm going to support this motion. I think it's a good idea, especially if we could start upgrading our gravel roads in the gravel road conversion program almost twice as, or essentially twice as quick as we would be doing it before this motion. A couple things I will say from constituents that have reached out and complained about the gravel roads, and these are on two different roads for sure. One was actually complaining that there was too much gravel put on because it was getting put on every year, and they didn't like it being put on every year because it would take the good road that was smooth, and then it would make it gravel, and it'd be more grading and stuff. And their opinion was it made it worse for their specific road, and we were putting on too much. The other one was, and I've heard this one from quite a few people, is over the years when you're coming out your driveway and you're going onto the road. Actually, the guy I was talking to 2 or 3 days ago, he's got a 16-inch upgrade from or ramp essentially from his driveway to where he gets on the road now. So we've been building it up too much, and that's another complaint. So maybe this would slow that down as well. So for me, it makes sense to do, especially if we can redo gravel roads quicker and save some of our tax base.
Any other questions or comments on this before we go back to Councillor Scacchi? Councillor Scacchi?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. Yeah, there's a lot of comments that have been said that there's not a lot that I disagree with in many aspects. My whole goal was is that often we task administration to increase efficiency and be more efficient. When we had these conversations, when I was first elected, at that time, upgrading gravel roads was never really something that was considered or even a direction. So when these reports came to council, saying that we were going to start, upgrading some gravel roads. I heard a lot of positive feedback from residents that are on the very busy networks of our gravel roads that were, excited that we had a program. Prior to this, anybody that wanted to upgrade a road, am I correct, Edward, had to essentially petition it and pay out of their pocket if this went forward in our road upgrade policy previously. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I'll take that one. That's correct. So before this program was approved last year, council passed a motion that it was only on a petition basis and would have to be paid for by the residents in full the first time.
Yeah, and I just wanted to summarize by saying I think that this is essentially double, and when I spoke with, and I did speak with administration on this, I did converse with them, and the whole goal is to double the work, so we're doing more. Twice as much work, twice as much conversion, and then maybe the first couple years, there might be some, playing with, as Mr. Brown said, with some of the service levels, but there's I'm not trying to bring this forward to decrease any services in the rural areas. I'm trying to bring something forward that as a council, we're directing administration to do things that are more efficiently, that's become back in reports that they've already identified. So this is trying to give them the tools that they've already identified. And just in closing, if it's not supported, I completely understand. There's been some great, some great comments, but this is a way to put an extra $1 million away and as well as save some money towards the 2025 tax rate. And just looking forward to seeing the outcome. Thank you.
With that, I'll put it to vote.
Councillor McGrail?
No.
All votes are in. Motion passes 14-4.
Thank you. Noting that we're in a budget meeting, so we have lots of flexibility, we're going to move backwards to deputations, which we skipped over. I believe we have one deputation, so I'll pass it to Judy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council, this evening you were sent an email with two deputations. One was email only from Vashti Duku, and we have Leah Watts here this evening for the second deputation. Leah, I welcome you to the podium now. As you see, there is a 5-minute timer on the screen. You'll have a maximum of 5 minutes to address council.
Thank you. Hello and good evening. I would like to begin by thanking the municipality of Chatham-Kent Council for the opportunity to speak this evening. As the speaker kindly said, my name is Leah Watts, and I stand before you today to advocate for our rural libraries, which I believe are pillars of small town communities. I grew up in Bridgetown, where I spent the first 16 years of my life. During those years, the Ridgetown Library was one of my most cherished places. I would spend countless hours there absorbing as much reading material as I could. I was a regular, taking home 6 books a week, only to rush back the next week for more. The library fed not only my love of literature, but it also played a key role in nurturing my intellectual curiosity. Libraries are far more than just places where we borrow books. They provide access to essential resources that rural residents otherwise may not have. In communities like ours, libraries are crucial for access to reading materials, computers, internet, and valuable community programming. These resources play a key role in the education and well-being of our residents, especially in towns where opportunities can be limited. As much as I love rural communities and as much as I loved growing up in Ridgetown, I'll be the first to admit that growing up in a small town sometimes meant there was not much to do. But the library was always there. It was a safe, welcoming place where I could not only find books, but where I could explore new ideas, learn, and grow. Libraries give children and adults alike a place to expand their minds and their futures. They provide opportunities that we cannot afford to lose. I feel as though closing these rural libraries would be a mistake, one that would leave a void in these towns that could not easily be filled. Please do not take away the resources that families in Highgate, Merlin, Bothwell, Wheatley, and Thamesville rely on. Libraries are critical for our children, our families, and our future. By continuing to fund and support our rural libraries, you are investing in the future of our rural communities. I thank you for your time and your attention to this matter.
Thank you. We'll continue on with any motions related to capital budget, capital new, and capital AMP. Councillor Sakachi.
Well, Mr. Chair, this one will probably have a little bit more conversation, I think, but I'd like to move that the remaining 2025 tax-funded life cycle inflation be removed from the budget savings of $1,044,731. And I will speak on it if I get a seconder.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Anderson? Go ahead, Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this one here, I could completely, this one here is definitely a challenge one for me to bring forward. I've worked through with the team considerably through the book, and to be very frank, I think that the team has done a very, very good job at bringing to council a very efficient budget. That said, I think that we are, experiencing a number that a lot of residents do not find palatable. In speaking with Mr. Quinton on this, a couple items is that the CIP funding that we currently we've done over the last, is it 6 years, Gord? Is that correct?
Yes, the program started. Of course, then there's a delay of it takes time people to develop their development and actually build the building. So a lot of our CIP. If you're referring to the apartment buildings, for example, most of that started to get completed in 2022.
Yeah.
So it's just a delay.
Yeah. So the logic, so I did try to be creative with Gordon, see if there was any ways that we can, use some of the money coming in some time when the CIP started to roll in, but unfortunately that there's not a way we could do so. So a lot of times we've heard administration refer to growth paying for growth. Currently right now, by doing this, what we're doing here, a lot of the current tax residents are essentially putting money aside for the future, which is great. But we also have a fair amount of money that's going to be coming to the municipality in regards to new business or new assessments in the next few years. And I'm very confident in our team that once that money starts to come in, that they'll allocate the money to infrastructure, which we've already done with the funding, the new funding that's come in. And just to be frank, this is probably one of the only other things in the budget that I've identified as some cost savings. There's no appetite right now to reduce services. There's no appetite right now to affect any rural communities. That's something that I won't support. And I think that this is a way that we can, at least save some money for today. And I know there might be a little bit pain for tomorrow, so I will allow, to appreciate everybody's feedback. Thank you.
Councillor Crew?
I guess, Councillor McGregor said, this looks good on paper. What does this mean, and what is the impact of it going forward?
Thank you for the question. As you know, we're updating our asset management plans. Council received, I believe it was 19 of them about a month ago. But the main ones being roads and bridges that are the costliest ones to council are coming to council next spring. So this means $1 million plus dollars of work cannot be done. Now that's for throughout our assets. This is a reduction to the inflation across all our asset classes. It's not particularly to roads or any one asset class. It's across the classes. This means less can be done, of course. It's $1 million less there. I think it really comes down to it's we've made our recommendations of what we think should be the funding of the asset management plan and the inflation to keep up with the erosion of purchasing dollars as inflation erodes that. But council has to weigh that against the ability to pay in the community. That's exactly what your role is tonight. So I wish we were getting more help from upper levels of government. This is really where I think the real problem is here. We asked for 2.06 tax percent for our assets. I wish we only had to ask for one and that the upper levels were funding it. And I just want to make that clear. We're not getting inflation. We're capped at our Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund at $10 million. we're not getting inflation on the federal funding either. This is where council's stuck with having to weigh what our recommended funding level would be versus what the community can afford.
Thank you.
Councillor Story?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly appreciate our effort, Councillor Sakashi's efforts to reduce the tax burden. Might be helpful for folks watching at home for a refresher is when we're talking about inflation, that's different from overages in projects, for example, because I know we've seen that in a variety of projects, which is not the fault of anyone in this room. It's just a question of often when we tender something and we start a project, by the time we're done, the costs have gone up. So is that a separate cost from what we're looking at in this motion?
Yes, whether there's overages or under, we're under quite a bit too. Some of that balances out. But this is the putting away new money for things to be done in the future. It's not about the existing projects that just have been finished. And this is saying that there's just over $1 million less in the pot to do things across our municipality with any type of infrastructure.
Thank you. Just for 2025?
This is a base reduction.
So it would be permanent moving forward? Is that?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, that makes me a little more uncomfortable since that is a bit of an unknown with the numbers we're looking at. Yeah, I think that one makes it a little less, that just potentially could cost us more in the long run, which I know it's appreciated as a balancing act, but that does leave me a little less comfortable with the fact that that would be permanent. But thank you for the answer.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you very much. Just building on what Councillor Story there said, because I'm not 100% clear on it. So we take out the $1 million this year, and just explain to me in a different way what that would mean for 2026?
Well, it's just that we're removing $1 million out of the base, so there's less money in the base, and once it's in the base, it's coming into our asset management life cycle reserves every year. So if you're lowering it down by $1 million, that's a permanent lowering down. So it's $1,044,000 in 2025, but it's another $1,044,000 in 26 and onward, right? Like it's a permanent cut.
Right, okay. Just two more. One follow-up to that then. Compound interest being the eighth wonder of the world, does that mean next year would actually be 1.044 million plus the inflationary increase we missed out on this year? If you see what I'm saying? Like if you had 5% every year, over 5 years, that's not 25%, it's more than 25%. So if you cut 1 year like this, that difference compounds as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Final question, and I don't mean to be glib or disagreeable. Is this an accounting thing, or does this actually mean $1 million less work being done next year?
This means $1 million less dollars being available for work in the future each year. So yes, it means that there's, what do you mean if it's an accounting thing?
Do we spend the whole thing every year? Like when you say it's $1 million less available for funding, does that mean $1 million less of work or $1 million less going into a pot?
So council does, staff does plan ahead on capital projects a long time ahead of time. So this is less money in the reserve base that'll impact future years. Whether it will exactly impact 2025 or whether it will be more of an impact in 26 or 27, that's up to Marissa's team as allocating out to projects the funds that they were given by council.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Finn?
Thank you, Chair. Just one question. Where is this coming from? Is it coming from the 2025 building life cycle requirement of 2.5 million out of there? Or is there a separate slot? Thank you. That one's on page 95.
Sorry, let's ask Meredith to put up slide 6 from the new information, and I can walk you through that. So this slide here from the new information earlier, so where the 1,044,000 came from was we would take the inflation, which was 2,745,000, less the money that we received from OMPF of 1.7 million. So the difference between those two numbers is the 1,044,000 that Councillor Sakachi referenced in his motion.
While this is on the screen, I just wanted to mention, just to remind council, in last year's multi-year budget, there was a motion to remove 1,082,000 in each of the years. So that's why it's showing that you are already, so just to be clear, Edward Seaman Administration recommended what was in column 1 of approximately $6.9 million of funding. Of tax dollars. Now we're down to the 3.9, and this would take it to 2.9 or 2.8. Sorry.
Sorry, just to add to that. No. So if this motion were to pass along with the previous motion that did pass, that would mean that new infrastructure funding for 2025 would go from 3.98 down to about 2.3 million in new funding between the two motions.
Any other questions on this motion? Councillor Sakachi.
That's more money though, correct? That's not, I want to be very clear that that's additional of from last year. So it's over $2 million more from last year, not that it's not actually a reduction. We're still putting more money in. Just wanted to correct that first, just so everybody's clear.
Yeah, you are correct. It's 2.3 million new money in the budget this year.
And I do want to I just have a couple questions for Mr. Soldo. Edward, I've just noticed since you've kind of taken the reins that there's been a significant, and I'm not talking about cost, because I know what projects are more money, but I do notice that there's been a significant more undertaking of capital projects that you seem to be kind of maneuvering them maybe a little bit quicker than past. Would that be an accurate assumption? That you're doing, you're prioritizing capital work at maybe a little bit higher rate than previously?
Thank you, through the budget chair. I have a great team that delivers projects on time and on budget as quickly as we can. So we are doing more work, and I would say we are completing a lot more work than we maybe have done in the past.
Thank you. And just a final question for you. This isn't a perfect scenario, but what we're experiencing right now is not a perfect scenario either. This is exactly what is said. It's a balancing act. And through you to Mr. Soldo, are you concerned that if this passes that there's any significant projects that would not, I'm not saying any projects, maybe there's some smaller ones, but is there any significant projects that this would it be identified in you stopping to have to proceed with that would affect our community negatively?
Thank you, through the budget chair. Every year we're given a certain budget envelope in terms of funding, and we go back and we determine which categories that we would allocate that funding to. Could be everything from the building life cycle reserve to roads to bridges. And what we'll do is, if this was reduced, we'd have to go back and see where we would take that $1 million off. So it would probably impact, a little bit in one area, a little bit in another area. Would this stop a significant project? No, I believe, we would still move forward with those, but we'd probably do less of those smaller projects.
Thank you. And just in closing, so this would basically mean that you would do what you've been continuing to do, bring to council, is find efficiencies and work through some things and maybe find some different cost savings, which we've seen through this last term. I know that to Councillor Story's point that a lot of projects have increased, but that's not the fault of our taxpayers. That's the fault of the inflation. I guess just in closing, Mr. Quinton, this motion here would not affect any of our funding streams. This would not put any pressure on us not meeting the mandates to the 1.5%, anything like that. Is that correct?
Short answer is correct. We still have the 1.5 in place, which is what council is committed to. What inflation you use, it is an arbitrary number. We talked about the municipal inflation, how it's been above CPI recently, and you know, we experienced such swings in our infrastructure costing over the last 3 years. It used to be, you know, a pretty accurate thing to estimate what inflation will be. Now it's sort of a wild card game about where where it's going to go. So if this is the, you know, I guess the short answer back to that is that this is up to council to make an appropriate guess of what inflation will be for infrastructure.
Thanks, Gordon. I do appreciate your team has done a fabulous job with this budget, and I completely understand the balancing approach, and we'll see if this, and just, sorry, the last question is, can you just, so council is aware what this would be for a savings? This is close to 0.5, is that correct, or 0.6, sorry?
Approximately 0.52.
Thank you.
Councillor Story, you had a question?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to ask another question, just with the discussion, which has been very helpful. Just when you went back to that slide with the chart, I'm not sure if I understood that correctly in terms of, is one of the reasons why we're able to look at this because we got increased OMPF funding? Did that impact that?
That's helped council out as well, that we've, in that previous motion that we, at the first of the meeting, we allocated 1.7 million and change million of OMPF to funding the inflation as well.
So that's, yes. So that, the one of the reasons why we can do that is because of the OMPF funding.
Yes. That was a surprise announcement by the province on October 30th, and without that, we'd be at approximately 1% higher right now.
And sincere thanks to the province for that windfall. That is wonderful. I think when we rely on that, that does mean that we don't always know what we're going to get. Obviously, we didn't know even a month ago we were going to get that. So when we tie these things to provincial funding, there is some uncertainty there, along with the inflation rate, which I know I read in this binder, and I think I've read in a few other places that it's going to go up in the first half of the year. That's the prediction for 2025, and obviously there are some political tea leaves that still need to be read about what that looks like with tariffs and how that'll impact our economy. So our inflation will be going up, we think, for the first half of 2025, and then will decline, correct?
Well, I do comments on what you said. First, back to this increase of funding from the province. It's increasing it back to the levels that it was in 2018. It was then slashed. Now it's been brought back to the 2018 level. Still no inflation adjustment over those last 6 years. We're just back to 2018 levels. But the entire Canadian economy is on pins and needles a little bit right now on whatever happens with tariffs. I don't think you could find an economist that could nail this, what's going to happen in the next 6 months, 6 to 2 years. You could be right on what you just said, but where inflation's going, where the economy in general is going, is sort of ups and airs worldwide, by the way, not a Chatham-Kent thing.
No, I appreciate that. There seems to be so many unknowns that sometimes I totally appreciate the intent behind this motion, and there are just right now so many unknowns that it does make it could work out very well for us, or it could not. So I appreciate that additional context. Thank you, Gord.
Seeing no other questions or comments, I'll call the vote.
Councillor McGrail.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. All votes are in. Motion passes 16-2.
Any other motions related to capital budget, capital new, and capital AMP? Seeing none, we'll move to items in the operating budget. So that's in the business case summaries on 157. If there's any items of interest, Councillor McGregor.
Thank you. I would just like the item that was removed on dust suppressant level of service be added back into the budget, and that we continue with the dust suppressant program.
Just waiting for a seconder. Councillor Wright. Go ahead, Councillor McGregor.
I'm guessing Councillor Wright seconded to that? Yes. Okay, thank you. Yes, just through my research and through conversation with rural residents, and the fact that I have lived and experienced the application of dust suppressant on gravel roads over many years, I think that it needs to continue. I think it's lessening our service to our rural residents, and I think that it is, if applied properly, and I know years can vary differently. Like, we can get years with a lot of rains, we can get years where it is very dry and it's not as effective in some of those scenarios, but it does work very well in more of a humid climate, which we do have within Chatham-Kent. It helps to bind the gravel and the base of the road, which helps improves when you're doing it year over year. So I very much struggle that this is a cut that's coming to the rural area, and I think I would be hard pressed to find some rural residents that would actually agree that this is a good idea at this point of time. I'd be interested to hear what other councillors have to say. I know we have a number of councillors here that either live on rural roads or have lived on rural roads, and so I would be interested to hear. I do understand with the programs and improving our roads and moving forward that this might change, and maybe that this needs to be put in, as we talked about averages and roads and averages, that maybe it needs to be looked at in that scenario for higher traffic roads and roads that need it more. Maybe we don't need the full amount that's budgeted, but I think that needs to be looked at over a longer period of time than just cutting it. I think that we need to better understand the impact rurally by removing it, and I don't think that we've had enough time to have a conversation to discuss it other than what's come in our budget binder as a recommendation to cut it from the budget at this time. I know it equates to about 0.5% back into our budget, I believe, somewhere in around there, 0.7% or something, but I would like to see it put back in, and I will leave it to my fellow councillors to help with that decision tonight.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair, and through you. So if we are decreasing the frequency that we are resurfacing gravel roads, would that decrease the amount of dust that we would have anyways, because it would be more compacted? Am I thinking about this properly?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair, for the question. What I understand the question is, because we're putting less life cycle gravel on the road, how's that going to impact dust? And so when you re-gravel a road, that can be some of the dustiest material as opposed to a road that's been that way for 3 years. And so less dust from that re-graveling will occur under this.
So would it be reasonable to think that we maybe wouldn't need that total amount for a dust suppressant? Could we decrease that amount, or is it something that you have to do and like that's how much it costs to even just consider it at all?
So this number here is what's currently in the budget book. And if you read the business case, it outlines what our current level of service is, which is any road that's not getting gravel gets brined. Any road that is getting gravel gets brined as the new gravel is going down. So that could be later in the year. And so when we do that, we use a high calcium product on the new gravel and a low calcium product on the other roads. And so we would be purchasing slightly less high cal because of the motion that was already passed tonight. So this number could be reduced, you know, some small percentage, but not significant.
Can you give me an amount? And it's only because I do want to support this, but I do recognize that it is 0.7%. Would it make sense if we could do it to like a 0.45, or would that be too low? That then it wouldn't be a service that is appropriate? Like what would be an appropriate amount, I guess, is what I am wondering. Because 0.7 is a lot. But I do support it. But if we aren't necessarily going to be needing that much in there, I'd rather not put in the tax base and then you come to us and ask for more later, should we need it? Or find it from somewhere else if we could.
Maybe if I could just weigh in on that. As Ryan has indicated, when you re-gravel it, you do the higher concentration. But if you're not, you're still putting brine down, right? So the real cost here is the cost of drivers. You're doing every road, no matter what, if it's being graveled that year or not, right? So it's to come up with a number, it's very insignificant.
So we would be putting down dust suppressant even if a road was nicely compacted because we aren't resurfacing it. We still do it anyways.
That is our current level of service.
Okay, thank you.
We have a long list of speakers, so I have seen all your hands. Councillor Crew?
Thank you. This is probably for Gord. I'm wondering, is this an area rated service? Because I don't think we need it in cities, towns, Wallaceburg, Chatham, but I do see the need or the want in rural areas because sometimes it's pretty dusty.
Thank you for the question. While we have close to 3,000 tax rates, we do not area rate roads because everyone can drive down any road for any purpose to get to anywhere they want to go. So we do not area rate roads, and I don't think any municipality in Ontario would area rate roads.
Okay, that was just my question. Thank you.
Councillor Harrigan?
Thank you. I don't have a question. I maybe just have a comment about why I think it maybe makes sense to support this for the current year. I appreciate that the business case is in our budget binder, but often the business cases are just kind of like the one-pager high-level summary. And I had a conversation about Councillor McGregor where she had alluded to many, many hours of research to understand dust suppressant, the impacts, what it means for the community. So for something like this, before I make a decision on it, I would really like to see a more detailed report into council. And perhaps that comes in the year 2025, and then it's referred into the 2026 budget once we as council have a better chance to kind of review the content. It's challenging sometimes in budget because you're like, well, does budget dictate the policy or does the policy be recommended into budget? But in this case, I really feel strongly that I don't know enough about what the impact could be to my constituents. And I'm thinking about, second concession's been brought up a few times, right? Like as roads get busy, sometimes it becomes a surprise issue. So I would just really hate in a dry summer to all of a sudden realize that we made this error and all of a sudden, we are really seeing air quality and dust issues in our rural communities. So I'm not sure how that, I don't know if you can refer to council for a report in 2025 and then this be considered in the 2026 budget, but that's what I would like to do. If that's too complicated, I can just vote no, and then staff will know that that's what we'd like to see at some point in 2025. That's okay too.
I'll look for advice from the clerk.
Because we're in budget committee, I think it would be best that the next council meeting, we bring a notice of motion for such a report to direct administration to bring it back.
Okay, so then for those of us who would like to see that, you would vote in favor of this so that it is in the budget for the current year, and then we would get more information at council. Okay.
Councillor Story, followed by Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ryan, thank you for that, your explanations. You mentioned this motion in the context of the other decisions we made tonight. I'm not sure I'm entirely clear on what that would look like. Have the other motions we made about the roads, repairs and gravel roads, et cetera, how would that impact what we're deciding in this motion at all?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair, for the question. So I believe, as Edward said, it's a very insignificant amount because with the new gravel, we use a high cal product. It's slightly more expensive. However, we're going to re-gravel a little less, but we're still going to put under our current level of service, we're then going to put the low cal brine. So what we're talking about is the difference in a low cal truck versus a high cal truck, which may be $1,000 over 10 kilometers. Like, so it's very insignificant. The motion that was passed earlier to impacting that number that's on the screen. However, one thing I didn't mention earlier that will impact, we were back here at council in 23 with the brine tender, or 22 for the 23 budget for the brine tender, where the cost doubled in that contract. And so that pricing is locked in for in theory, 25, 26, where we have an option to renew. And so we would have pricing around these levels, but if you go out to tender again, the last time we did, it doubled. And so, you know, we have no indication if in, say, 27, if we keep the service and in 27 tender again, that number could double again, which is what we saw happen in 2022.
Well, that's comforting. I appreciate that ask. So if those gravel roads that we're transitioning more quickly to tar and chip, that would have nothing to do with that. That's totally separate.
Thank you. So it would start reducing this number slowly, right? If we go out and we convert 10, 20 kilometers of gravel road to tar and chip, that's 10, 20 kilometers less we will have to apply dust suppressant to. So over time, that program could reduce this number, and then inflation's going to bring it up. And so, you know, in theory, if all your gravel roads were converted, you wouldn't need a budget for this, but that'll take quite a few years.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you very much. Councillor Story, again, kind of, I don't quite get your answer there, and that's my fault. That's a me thing, not a you thing. So if we were to cancel this, how does that impact our pricing and our costs? So kind of what I'm thinking about is the opposite of what Councillor Harrigan was thinking about. I think potentially we could pause this for a year, and then could we come back to it, say next year, and go, wow, we heard a lot of calls and we got a lot of complaints, and this was something we tried and failed at. How would that potentially impact our pricing for brine?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair, for the question. I don't have the legal agreement in front of me, and happy to have questions for legal for that, but I believe it was a one-year contract with 2 one-year extensions. And so my understanding is that if you didn't exercise the option to extend, that contract is now over. And so let's say you don't renew it, this motion passes, or this motion fails, you would have to retender the dust suppressant contract. Whereas if we renew it this year, you can renew it in 26 as well. But I believe if we don't exercise the renewal in 24, contract's over, you would have to retender.
Okay, so then one way or another, we're going to have to discuss this again after, well, not all of us, we'll discuss it again after 26?
If this motion failed.
No, if this motion, if this motion passed, right? That's what I'm saying. This motion passes, it's back in for 25, it's back in for 26, we'll say, right? And then you said it has to go back out for 27, or am I a year off?
No, you'd be correct. So if the policy decision was we're still doing dust suppressant, we'd be back at council in fall 26, early winter 27 with
That
a
means I
new
still might have to
contract.
deal with it. Okay. I guess my only other question is, does this mean we'd be mothballing the dust suppressant entirely? Because I know now people can call in, or they call their counselors and complain, and then we call you and say, hey, you know, Fargo is getting a lot of complaints about dust. Can we go out and hit it again? Would that still happen, or are we losing dust suppressant entirely at this point?
Thank you for the question. So if you read the budget business case, it is a complete service elimination. And part of the complication to that is, I believe there was a reference earlier about, you know, maybe you do some roads and not others. That can be really challenging because let's just say you did half the roads. Well, then the half of roads you're not doing, call in and complain and want you to do it, but we have no budget for it. And so it's a really tough service that it's really you're in or you're out. At this level, we do it. And so I think that would be a real challenge to do only some roads.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That's the kind of the end of my questions. Just a couple of comments, actually. I've really only had, well, other than that email that all of council got, I haven't had any calls or complaints or concerns about gravel roads and the dust suppressant on them, which doesn't mean they're not out there, just they haven't made them to my ear. And I'll be honest, I hate gravel roads. I hate dealing with them. Somebody once sent me an article from the Blenheim News Tribune dated 1970 talking about how council's wrestling with gravel roads. And it kind of finished me off on gravel roads, thinking that council for 50 years has been dealing with gravel roads. And I just don't think there's an answer, or rather, I don't think there's an end to it. So I'm still interested in the conversation. I don't know how I feel about it, but I'm going to have to feel something in a minute or two. So thank you.
Councillor Sakachi.
Need a second here. Actually, Councillor Thompson made a few of my points and asked my questions. I guess I appreciated the business case, Edward. I know that it's brief, but there's a couple things. So when it comes to dust suppressant, I do receive a fair amount of concerns. And some of the concerns is simply regarding that our dust suppressant now and doesn't work. And I haven't did hours of reading on this, but a lot of the older generation spoke to a different substance that was utilized in the past that was far more effective. So is this stuff, is the new stuff, is it clinically kind of proven that the new stuff that they utilize now just doesn't work as good as the old stuff from, like, let's say the 70s and 80s that I'm guessing you can no longer put on legally?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair, for the question. Yeah, as indicated in the approach, in the business case, there's been many different approaches over the years. Oil was used at one point, used motor oil, works really well. Cannot do that anymore. We have tried some other products. We experimented with organic corn-based kind of product. Super expensive, very difficult to apply, and the results weren't too much better. So, you know, I don't think the chemicals have changed. Obviously, the sources of where they get the brine may have a little more salt or less, depending on where it's coming from. But as indicated in the business case, there's a lot of challenges in delivering the service. And one thing that has significantly changed is the availability of truck drivers. In 1970, you can get 10 truck drivers right now. Nowadays, we've gone through this, you know, when they're trying to deliver, they only have 2 drivers available this day. We ask them to bring more. They can't procure the drivers. They can't keep them. And so delivering the service has become more and more difficult in a timely manner since, say, the 1970s.
And to you, Mr. Solo, I know that you go to a lot of conferences, you know, just through conversation. Is this topic ever discussed? And do you know what a lot of our neighboring municipalities, just because I guess my concern is I rather I do agree with some of the comments that Councillor McGregor has indicated. I guess my where I start to have a hard time grasping is that it's went up like 30% from when I first started, then it's essentially doubled. Then what if it, you know, if we see in 2 years again, like at what number, like do we, like as from administration, do you think that we're adding value to the road still? Is this a valuable service? Because I know some residents would feel that it's valuable, but do you think that it's, I guess you don't think if it's effective, if it's in the budget, but are you cutting it because of the money, or are you cutting it because you just don't think it's a valuable procurement of our funds?
Thank you through the budget chair to the councillor. I'll start off by saying this is a recommendation of staff. And, you know, some of our neighbors still do this, some don't. If you go out to the prairies where there's a lot of dirt roads, majority do not do that. I would say to you that we get lots of complaints about dust suppressant. We heard that from various councillors. And if you reduce this level of service, you're still going to get lots of complaints. And I would say that the number of complaints you get today really are a measure or a metric of its effectiveness end of the day. We apply it once, and I don't think we really talked about it tonight very much, but it's applied once per year. So if you get it applied in May, I can guarantee you it's not effective in June, July, and August because you've had a number of rains at that point. So if you know you get applied in August, it might work for a limited time frame at that point. One of the things we haven't talked about tonight either is the environmental sort of impact. We're an agricultural community, and we're putting salt down, and that salt eventually will you know, get into the air, into dust, and into the crops. So think about the productivity from an agricultural yield perspective. So getting back to your question, the short answer is you have to look at each service that you're providing and measure, you know, is this an effective use of dollars? End of the day, it's increased, as Ryan's indicated, doubled in cost. So then you look at, okay, you've got something that you're providing a service that's doubled in cost. Is it really being effective? If you truly wanted to have an effective dust suppressant program, you would apply it every month to every road that you have, and that would reduce your you know, number of complaints that you're getting, and would actually keep the dust down. But we're applying it once per year, and it will, depending on where you are, you know, be in that time frame. So how effective is it? I would say to you that it doesn't automatically dissolve the first rain that you get, but you know, it's simple science here. It's a salt. You put water on salt, it's going to dissolve, and dust particles are going to, you know, break apart and start to create dust again. So it's very limited effectiveness. In the past, as I think you indicated, and Ryan, you know, we used oil because it congeals everything together. So from the staff's perspective, it is not an effective use of dollars and is very limited. I'm not saying it has no effectiveness, but has very limited effective time frame. So when you balance those two together, that is why we as administration recommended cutting this level of service.
Thank you. And just, I did see that Mr. Taylor was here prior to, but maybe this is a question that that you guys can answer. From oh, he's behind us, I guess. So, but maybe you can answer. But from a contract perspective, we don't put dust suppressant down. When's your cutoff? Is September? Is that when you start cutting off putting dust suppressant down? Is September?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair, for the question. We ended our whole round of dust suppressant in August.
So from
this year.
Okay.
So we're done now. We would be exercising our option to renew, and then we would start applying again in the May timeframe.
So if this fails tonight, is there still an opportunity for us to discuss this in a more detailed report and still meet the contractual obligations that we may have to reconsider at some point? Because I'm on the kind of the same path as Councillor Thompson. I just want to know like how long that leeway is for us to still make that decision. If we say no tonight, that how much time do we have to view a report to see exactly what those costs are, or not costs, but I guess case of doing it, not doing it, what outlier community, other communities are doing, all those types of things. So do we still have time? Like when do you, like I guess that's the question from the time perspective.
Yeah, so to simplify that, I think you have some time until potentially February, March, when we would have to exercise the option to renew, because the contractor, needs to know to procure goods and labor. So that's not that far away, but it's not something that's on our high on our agenda for this month.
Thank you.
Councillor Hall, followed by Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Councillor Sakachi asked the questions I was going to ask. I was going to ask what, I guess, what staff have done for research with other communities that have, that either still do dust suppressant or have removed it. But I guess maybe one question, maybe just to zero it in. I know, Edward, you touched on it. But what would you, in terms of dust suppressant in Ontario, what's the best practice, would you say, right now?
I would say, Councillor, if you look across Canada, a lot of municipalities have gone away from this. It just really isn't effective. Ryan touched upon it. There's a lot of different solutions people have tried, but it just doesn't keep the dust down. End of the day, we're a rural agricultural community. Our roads have dirt and gravel on them. You're never going to eliminate dust.
Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The dust, it gets pretty bad out there if you're driving the roads as much as I do. And it's pretty bad if the kids are standing out there at bus time and they can't even see across the road and you got people driving up and down the road. I think if we don't put a depression on there, it's going to increase the accidents. It's a real safety factor for kids standing out at the bus. And another thing is the breathing from the silica dust. Like if all these people standing in this dust all the time, it's going to create problems in other areas. And if we do take this out of the budget tonight and then want to bring it back in a month from now, where are we going to get this money in a month from now if we've got rid of it tonight, the money? So, yeah, thank you.
Before I go back to Councillor McGregor, did I miss any hands? Councillor Doyle and then Councillor Jubinville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Definitely can agree with most of the comments made on either way of this one. It's a tough one. I guess my question would be, because I'm leaning towards not supporting this, and that's because I guess I've had all the complaints that we get, and we get a lot. I'd say some of them are in favor of the dust suppressant and some of them are not. A lot of people say it doesn't work. And I have not got really any calls from any constituents that live on gravel roads about this since it came out, and that again just could be because it's not out there yet. So my question would be, and I know it would be difficult and we'd have to go to RFP again, but say we get double, triple the complaints that we normally get, and this is like all rural councillors, how hard would it be to add this back in mid-2025 or potentially 2026? I guess 2026 would be easier, but is there any way, if our complaints just skyrocket, we can quickly add this back in, or what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair, for the question. So to your question about adding it back in 26, not any more work than it is now. The challenge with adding it back in 25 is that historically, for 20 plus years, there's only ever one or two bidders on this contract. The one who currently does it is a large outfit here in Chatham-Kent. They have to make business plans. And so I think it could be really challenging if you say tonight we don't have it, and then say in May, June, July, the complaints are really bad, and then we call them and say, hey, actually, we want to do this now and really quickly. I can't speak for them or guarantee that they would be able to offer any level of service like they are contractually obligated to do now. That's not to say they didn't come through, but I think that's a private business decision. So that's a real challenge, that it's not internal, it's 100% contracted service. And so I think adding it back in 25 would be very difficult. Adding it back in 26, obviously there would be costs that it won't be 1.398, it'll be higher than that.
Okay. But I guess for me, just on the complaints I've gotten both ways on the dust suppressant, it almost makes it worthwhile to do a 1-year test on it without putting it on, see what kind of feedback we get from the constituents, and then if If our complaints are about the same, then we leave it out and we save $1.4 million. That kind of makes sense to me, but.
Councillor Jubenville?
Thank you, Chair. I am going to support it. I think it's important that we keep it. If we remove it, we will have an influx of phone calls, and then we won't be able to accommodate them. So we'll have a year of not being able to accommodate these people. I think we owe it to our rural residents that I have had phone calls on it, so I think it's important that we keep it and maintain it for our rural residents. Thank you.
Any more hands before we go back to Councillor McGregor? I'll make a couple comments before I go back to you, so I'll give you the floor last. I certainly appreciate bringing this forward. Similar to Councillor Dole, even though I'm a Ward 6 councillor, I received a couple of comments about it in the past little bit. Same thing, both sides of the argument. And like Councillor Thompson said, I think that gravel roads are gravel roads and they're dusty and it's tough every time we discuss it. I do think we have a responsibility to follow evidence in some of these things. You know, if you have a viral infection, you go to your doctor, you ask for antibiotics. The right cure to the wrong disease isn't going to help you. I'm glad we're investing in upgrading some of our highly traveled gravel roads to better surfaces. I think that's a good step in the right direction. From what I understand from infrastructure and engineering, this isn't an effective solution for the problem that we're facing. If we look at this amount of money compounded over a period of time, you know, the next 10 years, that's $15 to $20 million in a solution that's, you know, washing away into a ditch. I don't know if that's the best use of money, so I appreciate that we're going to get feedback both ways on this one, but I do think that we have to follow the evidence and make sure that we're keeping that top of mind when we're making some of these decisions. Whichever way it goes, I think it's a good idea to have a report back. I would caution that there's some causality issues. We might want to also track complaints based on, you know, rainfall levels for the year. You might see less complaints in a wetter year, more in a dry year. There's obviously going to be a lot of factors that play into that. But certainly appreciate the conversation. I'll go back to Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, and through the chair, and thank you for the comments around the table. And it's very clear to me that this council needs some more education on this, on dust suppressant. And I am fully in agreement with Councillor Harrigan. I think at this point we should continue to have this in the budget, and then we should spend some time over the next year before we get to the next budget. If we cut it out this year and then we have problems, then we can't get the service. We also then have to recontract at a price where it's going to be, I'm sure, much higher than what we've got it listed at now if we continue on with the program. I think that this council has been very good, and as has our administration, about reaching out to our community and trying to get community feedback. I don't think that our rural area has even, in a lot of areas, probably don't have it on their radar yet and understand the effect of this. And I think that it should continue in the budget for this year. It should be relooked at. We should pay more attention to the complaints and what happens throughout the year. And we should also do community consultation throughout and have a proper report brought back to council. And then we revisit this again for the 2026 budget. I hope that there'll be enough that will support this moving forward, and that we can knuckle down and find other ways other than removing this service at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. And just before we vote, I'll make sure that we understand what we're voting on. So a yes vote puts this money back into the budget, so continues the service. A no vote would mean no dust suppressant. So yes vote, yes dust suppressant, no vote, no dust suppressant. Just to make that nice and clear for everyone. It is budget, so we can revisit anything we need to if we happen to make a mistake, but thought I'd clarify that in advance. So with that, I'll call the vote.
Councillor McGrail?
Yes.
Councillor Crew? All votes are in. Motion fails 7 to 11.
Okay, so we'll continue on through the operating budget items. Any other motions from those pages 157, 158, items of interest? Give everyone a moment to look through those. Pardon me? So it's any of the operating budget items, so business cases on 157, 158. I'm waiting for you, Councillor Scotch. Councillor Story?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this the time in the meeting where we would ask some questions about these versus just a full-on motion, or?
Yep, you can ask questions about any of these items
Okay.
on
So I was
these
quite
two pages
sure
too.
of that
Yep.
process. Thank you. On page 158, the contracted security services of 341,676. That's a new service for this year that we had voted on earlier in the year, if I'm remembering correctly. And this would be moving forward. That's what that would be if we kept the same level of service for that moving forward.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Budget Chair. I believe that line item is a combination of security services for a number of different locations. So I can have Mr. Pollock provide a little more detail and the business case. It's for the City Hall or the Civic Center here, but also related to the cabin project and the library. So it's 3 services combined into one, and he can provide a little more detail.
Okay, that makes sense. I would appreciate a little more detail on that if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. Rob Pollock, Director for Parks, Fleet, and Facilities. So this business case is for contracted security services for council meetings. Increase in library security at the Chatham Library branch, and for 24/7 security presence at the cabin's transitional site once it's operational.
Do you have a breakdown of that, Rob? Thank you.
Maybe if I can jump in. If we look at page 378, I believe, there's a separate business case there that provides more detail.
So the business case isn't directly broken down, it's combined into one. It would be put out as one RFP if this is approved in the budget. It would cover 24/7 at the cabins. It would add an 18 hours per week security presence at the Chatham Library. And it would include the security presence for council meetings that we have here tonight, for all the council meetings throughout the year, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and just for reference as well, if you're looking through these business cases, the page numbers are down the far right column. If you need to quickly flip through and find information on any one of those items as well to follow along. Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you. I'd like to move that the emergency transitional cabin program be funded an additional $200,000 one time in 2025 from the ESS Future Economic Downturn Reserve.
Do you have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Finn. Go ahead, Councillor Sakachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm hoping, and I know that this is something that, we all hope, I know Gord's team hopes that there's going to be some additional funding coming down, but I think that since it is a one-time expense and that this is a one-time, fee, I know that not from an operational standpoint that there is going to be some ongoing expense. but just really an accounting exercise to try to save $200,000 from the 2025 budget from the tax-funded portion. And I'm sure that Mr. Quinton or Mr. Brown might have some comments on that, but I'll leave it to council to discuss. Thank you.
No, I would just say that Jody's team is actively searching to see if we can get either operating or capital funds. I don't have that much optimism on the operating, but perhaps there's some on the capital that, and we had amortized the capital over a 15-year period. So we're I don't know, Jody, if you have anything else to add.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair and Councillor Sakachi, for your question. I'm optimistic. We have a number of different grant applications out. We've made a number of different requests for funding from higher levels of government. Hopeful that we will receive some funding from another level of government. So time will tell what happens with that.
Just reminding, time will tell, we did fund this over a 2-year period, right? It was funded over 2020 because we had the system in place at the shelter till May 31st. So we are only building into the 2025 budget 7/12 of the cost anyway. So whatever happens, we'll know by next 2026 update exactly where we're at. Did we get any money? And it can all balance out in what we're asking for 2026.
Just one quick, is there any major concerns with this though, Mr. Quinton or Mr. Brown?
No, because of the unknowns on whether we are trying desperately to get upper level funding. It's election year for both, coming up for both, at both levels of governments. I think homelessness is a big issue across the country. So it's unknown.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Budget Chair. The only thing I would add is that, certain reserves, there's an exercise involved in determining what is the right amount in reserves. In fact, we have some reserves that are required legislatively, and there's some guidance given, such as the Building Department Reserve, in terms of how much should be in it. This is much more of a, well, you can see from the title, it's much more of a subjective reserve. It was created some time ago by council. It's not something that has to exist. I think it's a good thing to have it there, and we have used it on occasion. But it's really up to council to decide, are we in an economic downturn? And if we are, is this the right time to use some of it? So you're not depleting it, but you're giving us a little bit of relief by using it. So I'm not sure we'd recommend it, but it's not going to create any major issues either. So.
Any other questions or comments related to this motion? Seeing none, if you have anything else, Councillor Scotchy?
That's it, Mr. Chair.
Okay, with that, I'll call the vote.
Councillor McGrail?
Yes.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-1.
And I'll just look to my left for an update on what our budget impact is right now.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. So taking all approved recommendations tonight, we're currently at 5.09.
Any other items of interest, even just questions on items on the business case summary 157 and 158? Councillor Hall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking at the land ambulance inflation and contract increase item. I see it in there. It's the consequences of not doing this. Like it says, an agreement has been reached and we're contractually obligated. But I just looking at that and seeing the inflation number and going back to our conversation from a little while ago about inflation being a little bit of a wild card, I figured I would ask: is there with these numbers and is there wiggle room? Is there is there any guessing, I guess, in terms of how the inflation is incorporated into this number, or is that a set thing and we're already contractually obligated?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sometimes timing goes against us, and it's taken a little longer than we anticipated to negotiate the land ambulance contract. Although I can tell you it's on a December council meeting, and these are the exact numbers that will be recommended to council. for a 5-year contract, so exactly these numbers.
Right, so I guess your recommendation would be not to mess with this number at this time.
It's exactly what you need to fund the contract.
Thank you.
Councillor Story?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions. First one being the divestment of Clearville Park. I know there's no dollar amount on it, but I know there is some detail in the rest of the book. Just wondering if the users of that park have been consulted on that, or they're aware of this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. No, the business case was put forward for Council's consideration. It is as the Council's indicated, doesn't really have an impact on the operating budget. It's more of a cost avoidance in the longer term, given the high capital cost that we anticipate to occur in that location. But in terms of consultation, we have not had a consultation with the user groups there.
Thank you. Next question. 1-year pause on transfer to reserves, about 2.2 million. Just looking at that additional detail, do we have any concern, Gord, that those, by taking from or not investing in those reserves in the coming year is going to be problematic? Put any extra stress on those items?
So each of those reserves, we looked at the balance and what the appropriate amount in those reserves should be. And it was administration's recommendation that the balance was appropriate, so we should be able to take a pause and would have no impact moving forward on those reserves.
Thank you. So how much, can you remind me how many different reserve accounts we have again? Roughly?
Close to a couple hundred. I don't have the exact number, but a significant number.
So with these are the only 6 of the entire number of reserves that you feel comfortable removing anything from?
A lot of the reserves we have are part of our asset management plan, which we're significantly underfunded in as it is. So these are reserves that aren't tied to the asset management plan, and of those reserves, those are the ones that we feel comfortable making that recommendation for.
Thank you.
Oh,
Sorry, could you tell me 170206 reserve is closed? I just don't know what that short form stands for.
Closed session are the HR reserves.
Thank you.
Councillor Wright?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Divestment of Clearville Park, does that mean that it's going to go up for sale here, or what are we doing here? Like, somebody answer that?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. To the councillor, that would be the intention of this business case. When you do a review of other municipalities and, the operations of a park like this, normally part of their operations, it's not. So when you look at our strategic plan, running a trailer park isn't usually something the municipality does. So what we're proposing is to be going out to market and seeing if there's a private operator that would take over this facility.
So does that mean it's going up for sale, or are we leasing it out, or what's happening here?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, we would be selling the property as well as the business case indicates, it's really a cost avoidance item related to the future capital costs. So we'd be looking for someone to take over the park and run it.
So we're not going to have no public input in this?
To this point, it's a potential business case for council to consider. it's really a decision of council. Are you going to sell this property or keep running it based on the cost that we would incur?
So the decision we make tonight on it, is this the final one, or are we gonna bring it back to council?
Well, maybe I can answer that, Mr. Budget Chair. So, I think the decision to divest it would be final, but the problem we would have is we don't know if anyone would buy it. So you asked the question whether we would lease it or whether we would sell it. I think the intent would be to try to sell it, but ultimately if we can't, there may be some other options that council has to consider, whether it's hold on to it longer and lease it out. Those are options that we won't know until we get some some direction to divest it. And then we'd come back to council and get direction on what that would look like, because there's no guarantee somebody would buy it. I expect that there's an interest in it, and I will say I agree with Mr. Solo that it's not a core service. We just can't be everything to everybody. So what we're trying to do is focus on what our core services are. If you want to be in the business of running a campground, then vote against it. But I think the challenge we have is that it's taking up a lot of staff time, and we have core service things like a lot of the stuff we've discussed. So I do think we'd have to come back to council to get direction. We're not going to sell it to a purchaser without council approving the price and the basic terms of the conditions. And like I said, if it doesn't sell, then we'll have to come back to council with other options. So
This really isn't fair for tenants that are out there just to find out that's going to get divested on a council meeting without any talks or anything with them. There should have been some discussion there.
And I understand that. I guess the challenge we have is what do we say to people before council has made the decision? If you want to bring a motion that we talk to the folks there first and see what their interests are, we can do that. It doesn't mean that it's going to have a negative impact on the users of the campground, because if somebody comes along and buys it, quite frankly, the level of service might be better than the level of service we're providing. So until we get direction from council, there's not much that we can say to folks. So I get it. It's a cart before the horse thing. I'm not sure what we can do in these circumstances. The challenge we have is if we reach out to the group and tell them that, look, we're proposing this to council, without knowing exactly what it's going to look like, you're going to get a lot of phone calls from people, and we still wouldn't have answers about whether it's going to sell, who's going to buy it, whether it's going to be leased, that sort of thing. So I get your point, and if council wants to give us direction to communicate with the campground users. By the way, many of those are difficult to get a hold of too, right? Because I think a lot of them are local, but I know some of them are not local. We'll take that direction from council if you'd like to do that before you make a decision to divest.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Dubin, in the past, a few years ago, we were in talks with Lower Thames Conservation taking it over. And I'd like to see that visit again, if I can make a motion that we look into seeing if Lower Thames could be interested in taking over before we just divest it.
I'm not speaking against motion. That's your call, Councillor. I will say that if we put it up for sale, that would be part of what we would do. We would talk to Lower Thames. I think conservation authorities are starting to change the business they're in as well. And I don't know, I hate to put Mr. McAllister on the spot, but I know that there was a time when conservation authorities were more involved in campgrounds, but now they too are starting to focus on their core services. And I'm not sure if that's one of the functions that Lower Thames is still in the business of doing. Mr. McAllister might be able to speak to that.
Yes, through several changes to the Conservation Authorities Act over the past couple of years, conservation authorities have been given clearer mandates as to what their core services are. So they have different service level categories. Service level 1 is what's mandated. That's your core flood protection. Service level 2 are special programs generally that municipalities may want to fund. And then special 3 is similar to that. It's more conservation type things that municipalities would fund, not through the general levy. But saying that, I would think for the conservation to take it over, it would probably require funding from council to do so, because I don't believe they have the funds to do it, right? Because you're basically asking them to provide the service. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just, Mr. Chair, if I can add, we did reach out to the Conservation Authority previously, and they had no interest in providing that service.
Mr. Dubin, I think we're gonna create a problem here, because a lot of that was donated land, and the people of the community built the park to start with, and then it was handed over to Orford Township. And now we're putting it up for sale, like it's gonna create a lot of hardship there, so.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Councillor. I think, like I said, if council wants to give us different direction, perhaps to explore the divestment and to communicate with the campground, or at least some of the campground users. That's the thing. It's not a set group of people, but I understand quite a few actually from Chatham-Kent just go down there. So we can do that if that's the direction council wants. We'll certainly take that. We'll take that direction from you.
So do I need to make a motion that we look into this further before it's divested?
Yep, you would need to make that motion.
Need a seconder for that?
Seconded by Councillor McDonald.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you. I just have a question here comparing the chart, like the base impact in the chart for the divestment is noted as just being 0. But then in the briefing note, it notes all of the cost savings, right? So if we're not hiring, so say we divested today, we don't hire any staff, we don't run it for the 2025 season, would that not be marked as, like, would that not be a tax savings operationally? Like, why is it 0 and not a bracketed number?
Because we would no longer get the user fees, so the user fees offset the expenses. So it's a net zero
Perfect.
impact.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this item? Councillor Doyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question. So on 417, when it talks about the estimated costs that we'll be saving, I'm just curious, because the PUC operates the water mains and water connections for the park, whether we own it or somebody else owns it, would the PUC still be paying for the water connections, water main replacement, and sanitary main replacement for the 3.4 million?
Through the chair, there'll be a number of savings. Some are tax related, some are related to the water rates. So the water main needs to get replaced. But if a private owner was running that, potentially the PUC could be getting them to actually do that replacement as part of their responsibility. So there would be a savings there. It's really about reducing the infrastructure gap. We know that these items are coming forward, and if we can divest, you may have remember Mr. Hinnerly talking about, divestment is an option in terms of our asset management plan, in terms of reducing the gap. So we should always be looking at divestment as a potential option to help the infrastructure gap instead of just, trying to spend more money to close that gap.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the second question, just looking at, so on 418 where it says the current seasonal rates that we charge compared to what other places charge and what we would have to charge if we wanted to recoup our costs. So I guess looking at this, it looks like whether we own it or whether we sell it and it goes private, regardless, they're gonna have a rate increase that's probably gonna double. Would that make sense?
Through the budget chair to the councillor, I would say that the rates that we charge the users are very much on the low end compared to other similar facilities that we've looked into.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Sakachi?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. Just a quick question to Mr. Quinton. So as a municipality, is it a fair assumption to say that we're actually competing against public business with the campgrounds? Is that something that we're currently doing? And I thought that was, and I probably am misunderstanding this improperly, but I thought that's not something that municipality was relatively supposed to do.
Whether we're supposed to or not, we inherited this from Orford Township. We also have a second trailer park in Mitchell's Bay. That one's not being suggested tonight because there's a longer term lease, but it's a similar topic of should we be competing with the private sector if the private sector can actually operate these operations? So I think what Mr. Soldol is saying is we could test the market and see if there's interest. And if there's zero interest of running it as a trailer park, council would have input on whether it was to continue, whether we would keep, rather than to sell it to one individual for as a parcel of land for them to keep for themselves. Council would have that decision to make on whether we want to continue to operate it as a trailer park. But Mr. Soldol has indicated the large amount of capital expenses that are coming in the next 10 years. And right now, it's not a drain on the tax base. It's the fees are paying the bills. The 10-year forecast is that that'll be a problem unless we double or triple the rates. And that's why it's suggested here as asset divestment, because it's not a mandated service. I also would like, while I got the floor, I'd just point out West Elgin, our neighbor, has in the last month announced the sale of New Glasgow Trailer Park, which is their publicly owned trailer park that was created about actually before this one, and it's up for sale as well.
Thank you. Actually, I read that, not on social media because you can't, but I did read that, and I was just curious to see maybe Mr. Dubin, you know, is this isn't a core service, right? So is this something that most municipalities, I'm appreciative of the actual park component of Clearville Park, but as far as like a trailer, you know, the campground and that, would this be considered like a core service that most municipalities offer?
I don't, to you, Mr. Budget Chair, I don't think it's a core service that most municipalities offer, but there are some municipalities that offer it. And there's various reasons, right? Sometimes maybe because it's connected to a larger municipal facility. It just depends. But I think that given all the pressures that we have to provide certain services, and that's what we're talking about today, this is why staff brought this forward. It's not just the fact that it's going to be causing a lot of capital cost in the future. It's just that we can't be everything to all people. And your question about competing with the private sector, yeah, we would be competing with the private sector. Having said that, there are times that we do have to compete with the private sector, and we do. John Bradley Center competes with the private sector from the standpoint that the private sector is in that business. Long-term care, we compete with the private sector, but we have to do that legislatively. So you have to kind of look at different businesses. But this is certainly a business that you're seeing less and less municipalities involved in. And I think to Mr. McAllister's point, you're also seeing conservation authorities move away from them as well, because they have to focus on their core service. Sometimes it comes down to money. If it's a moneymaker or if it's a big tourism attraction, then that may be a decision why a municipality would want to keep it. So there's different considerations for council and for municipalities to consider.
Thank you. And just one follow-up question. So I did catch the end of it. So if this was to be divested, so this would not come back to council ever again if we had an offer? Because my thought process would be that if we had an offer to purchase, if we did divest and it came back, that it would in fact come back to council.
It will absolutely come back to council.
That's what I thought. So
yeah.
So this isn't basically saying that we're going to look at you know, this isn't saying that we're selling this for sure. We're going to, the business case to try to divest it.
Yeah, and when you make a decision to divest, that means it's your intention to try to sell it. But as you probably all know, you try to sell certain things and they don't get sold. So you have to then go back to the drawing board. But either way, it will come back to council. Council will get to make the decision about who you sell it to. If you're comfortable with the purchase price, that's a decision for council to make. And if we don't get anyone who's interested, or if you get an offer that you don't think is sufficient, then you'll have to decide then, do we pursue leasing or do we continue to operate it? And maybe try again next time.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that this, in fact, will be coming back if there is the appetite to divest. So this will be something that the public will have the ability to weigh in on, as well as, you know, if there's anything else brought forward in regards to concerns in the community. So thank you.
Councillor Finn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, if somebody could answer, would that also include the city-owned parkland down at the end of the road and the boat launch? Would it also go with the park, or would that be kept?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Budget Chair. It would include the entire parcel.
Any other questions, Councillor Finn? That's good. Okay, just before I go back to you, Councillor Wright, we have a motion now up that the business case divestment of Clear Road Park be removed from the budget. So that would cancel the divestment of that. I believe your motion to do public consultation might need to be one made outside of budget. Would that be correct? Okay. Councillor Wright, go ahead.
Yeah, on the public park there on the other side of the trailer park, it's been a public park since 1816. It's one of our longest running parks in Chatham-Kent. That's all.
Okay, seeing no other questions or comments, I will call the vote.
Councillor McGrail?
Yes.
Still waiting.
For clarification, yes means don't get rid of it. No means divest it. I think I was right.
All votes are in. Motion fails 7-11.
Okay, with that, we are at just about 8 o'clock. So we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be moving to closed session. So the closed session is in this room, correct? Okay, so we'll come back to closed session. Following closed session, depending on how long that takes, we will come back to an open session budget meeting. Pardon me? Oh, we're at 5.09? 5.09. Okay, see you all in 10 minutes.
That's where we are right now for the budget.
The open session portion of the budget deliberations. So unless there are other operating budgets from pages 157, 158, we'll move on to some other motions from the floor. Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you. So my motion is regarding the Wi-Fi at recreational buildings. It's on page 467 in the budget. So that is currently for consideration. So I would like to motion that the Wi-Fi and recreational buildings be added to the base budget and the one-time costs of $38,396 be funded from council contributions from the Hydro One funding program.
Do you have a second? Councillor Hall, seconded.
And if I can, Mr. Chair, I can just maybe
Go
give
ahead.
some comment. So in the briefing note, this was actually something we discussed earlier in 2024, back in February, and council approved it for this briefing note to go into our budget. So it is quite an insignificant cost in the grand scheme of the budget. It's $28,000 annually to allow the public to have Wi-Fi access when they use our recreational buildings. I have become a hockey mom, and just about every other arena outside of CK we go to, there's a landing page, there's access to Wi-Fi. Communities actually use it for great promotion to showcase what assets their community has to promote tourism and those sorts of things in order to access the Wi-Fi. And when I'm here, we often in the arenas note that a general comment is, why don't we have good Wi-Fi service in our local arenas? So I was speaking just with our budget staff. I know that there is a capital cost or a one-time cost to do this that is eligible to be funded out of our Hydro One funding. So I did send an email out earlier today asking councillors if they would like to contribute to that. It would be one of either kind of $4,000 for a councillor who wants to contribute to something in their ward, or if we wanted to just divide it up across all of council, if it's something that would support it, would be somewhere around $2,700 or $2,800 coming out of our council funding for 2025. So I think we can maybe figure out those loose ends, just over email and that sort of thing, just because it is really immaterial in terms of the total budget. So really looking for that support to add this 28 grand into base to provide that service for residents.
Do we have questions about that? So I did have a question. So if it's 28 going into base, is that coming from the Hydro One funding every year from councillors?
No, the 28 would go into base from tax revenues.
Okay.
But the one-time of the 38 capital funding would be just a one-time contribution from our hydro funding.
All right. Any other questions? I would be remiss if I didn't note that Ward 6 only has 6 councillors, about 50% of the population, only 30% of the arenas. So the way we divide those funds up is going to be a little bit challenging, which is part of I think, the challenge around the ward councillor funding as well, that the funds aren't distributed equally by population through the community. So it does present a few challenges.
Can I do a friendly amendment to that 38,000 just comes out of the general one, not out of our ward count, but we have a pool of several million left. We just take the 38 out of that. We don't have to ask who's going to contribute what.
Super friendly, super friendly.
Okay. Good to hear. I hear administratively it's easier too, so. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this motion?
Sorry. Well, I would encourage that we can go maybe find a sponsor to help with that 28,000 annual costs. We'll put the full in, but hopefully we can find maybe a provider that might want to step up and put their name to it and maybe hopefully reduce the price somewhat.
Mr. Chair, we're just getting it up on the screen, so we just need a second.
Great, no problem. Okay, we've got the motion up on the board, so with that, I will call the vote. Oh,
Mr. Chair, it's not from the counselor funding, it's just from the Hydro One amounts.
okay.
You can remove the words from the counselor funding. That'll meet the,
Consistent, yeah.
the amendment, the friendly amendment.
Is that the Hydro One reserve rather than the Hydro One money?
Sure. Same thing, but sure.
I didn't even read it, it seems more official calling reserve money.
Cash.
Hydro One reserve instead of money.
Okay, now it looks good. So now I will call a vote.
Counselor McGrail? Counselor Doyle? All votes are in, motion passes 18-0.
And now we'll bring up the motions from closed session that we need to pass and open here. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Harrigan, seconded by Councillor Thompson. Seeing no questions, I'll call the vote.
Counselor McGrail?
Yes.
All votes are in, motion passes 18-0.
Councillor Story?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple of additional questions from the binder that came in from constituents. Is this the appropriate time to ask them?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. The first being the Bradley Center. I had a couple of questions from residents about, there is on page 77, it does tell us what the total payment was, what is for Riverview Gardens. It doesn't say the same for the John D. Bradley Center. And would there be any scenario where we would no longer operate that and move that to a private sector partner? That's a question that came in to me from constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So council in 2012-13 debated convention centers quite a bit. The old Kinsman Auditorium was small and at its full end of its life, probably 20 years past the end of its life at the end. And so the council of the day debated about whether we needed a convention center and looked out to the private sector. At that time, there was no private sector willingness to build and run a convention center because you need the large space, the Freedom Hall in the back, right? So we have several places in Chatham-Kent that will hold 150, 200, 250 people. But if you want to have a farm show, a garden show, whatever, or several charities use it for large events, it needs some subsidization because it's empty. The big room at the back is empty 300 days of the year. You know, there's quite a few weekends where there's full events 3 or 4 days long, but there's lots of days where it's empty. So that's why it needs a little bit of subsidization to run any convention, any large facility across Canada. It's not a unique to Chatham-Kent thing. If you want to have a place for large get-togethers, it requires some subsidy. So that's sort of the history of how we got to here. That was previous to this council. What's on here is is the debt payments. The council of the day also chose the $8 million of costs at the time to spread that cost over a 20-year period by the use of a debenture. And that's what we're still paying off. There's still about $4.5 million owing on that debenture.
We've got, so in 2012, we went for 20 years?
Yes. Keep in mind, recession of 2009, and the will to spread this cost over a long period of time. They, instead of, they could have spread it over 5 years, for example. Well, they decided to spread it over 20 years, and that's a council decision at the time.
So we have about 8 years left on that.
Yes.
And do you think, I'm not sure how this normally would work, but are there certain intervals? It's been about 12 years since we've discussed it. Is there any industry standard on when we would review that in terms of there was no one interested in 2012 in operating it? Do we think that would ever change?
So it does go out for RFP regularly, and I can't remember the year, but whether it was this term or the end of last term, but it came back. We had recommended a 5-year contract, and council changed it to a 3-year contract at that time. So it's coming up for a contract for somebody to operate it. And that's how we see how much subsidization. It's a contract to operate it, but it still requires some subsidization.
Is that Compass?
Yeah, it's currently Compass Group.
Okay, and so they're doing the operations and we are paying the debt?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Next is page 85. There is the discussions of the 12% invested. And the regional park along Bear Line Road is mentioned. Can you please remind me, we approved the infrastructure to develop the underground services, but we haven't approved anything else at this point. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. So what was approved was the concept design of what was going on at the park. The first phase of all the infrastructure going in is almost complete right now. There's just some last minute items that's getting cleaned up. Council approved us to enter an agreement to operate a tennis dome with a third party. That was approved. And we're currently in the design phase of completing the design phase for phase 2 and phase 3, which the concept design included a pickleball court, multi-use courts, playground facility, soccer field, and cricket pitch.
And do we have can you please also remind me when that's coming back to us for review, the design phases? We're going to get designed the second and third phases all together to review at council?
Yeah, so right now we're doing the design phases. It's in the capital new budget that we have allocated funds for the next phases. And yeah, once those designs are done, we'd be coming back to council to show what those next phases would be and going out to the public for the tender process.
Okay, and do you think that's going to be in 2025?
Yes, the plan is to come back in 2025 and go through the tender process for that next phase.
Okay, thank you. One final question, unless I saw Councillor Sakachi might have something related to that. I don't want to interrupt.
Actually, Councillor, sorry, I was just gonna, the contract for the Bradley Center, I think the motion I made was in 2023 for I'm pretty sure it was 2023 regarding the Compass Group. Just wanted to.
Oh, thanks. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. Last and finally, in terms of the budget, the capital budget summary that starts on page 87, just to, as we look forward, what kind of contingency amounts are is there a standard contingency that we're still looking at? And will we consider changing that in light of the increased costs that we were facing in our construction and infrastructure projects? I know this list looks like it's to 2027. Just wondering what the contingency fees we're including in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Chair. I'll start. The contingency really depends on the complexity of the project, so I don't believe there's a standard that's applied to every single project. The more complex projects, you typically would carry a higher contingency. I'll ask the Director of Engineering maybe to provide any additional context.
Through you, Budget Chair. So as Mr. Soldo said, the contingency amounts that we include for our capital projects vary quite a bit depending on scope of the project and where we're at in the design process. So if something is, we've already undertaken preliminary design and we're into the detailed design phase, we may have refined that contingency. And then at the point of construction, we'd refine that even further. If something is a project in 2027 or 2026 where we haven't undertaken any preliminary design, we may be carrying a higher contingency in that budget envelope right now. So that might be 25% for something that's projected in the future. And it might be down to 10% when we put it out to tender, but that does vary project to project.
Thank you for that. And I think it's more of that makes sense, and thanks for explaining that. As you would get closer to refining that cost, then you have a much better sense of what you're looking at. I think my concern is just that maybe it's more of a big picture budget question, is that we have seen multiple projects, and again, to Councillor Sakachi's point as well, this is not a complaint at all about the internal processes we have. It's just that often between the time where we've started a project and we end it, costs go up globally that we have no control over. And I just wonder, in the light of, a bigger picture economic impact of tariffs when we have a global supply chain, is it worthwhile to consider larger contingencies so we're not getting caught out for the next 4 years on how our construction projects end up looking? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So I just want to clarify as well. We have a capital budget book with all the details of each one that's online. We didn't print it for you. As relates to the specific question, Marissa and her team, even like if you look at this year in the capital budget, they actually looked at all the projects that were approved, did a refinement, updated those, and that'll be an annual process. So the team has tried to capture these unknowns and any contingencies, but it will be an annual update that they will review. And maybe, Marissa, if you have anything else to add, but I just want to highlight that they do go through that exercise annually still.
Through your Budget Chair, yes, that is correct. So that's that 2025 budget update. There are project amendments in the capital book, and that's what those entail, is us reviewing the scope of projects and timing of projects, because timing might change the estimate for the cost of the project. That is something that we're doing annually and something we do through the design process before we put it out to procurement, and then we're reviewing again before we award that project. So.
Thank you. And so if after, let's say, January, we were in the middle of a project that costs went up substantially, that would come out of reserve? If there was an unexpected cost increase to something that was out of our control?
Through your Budget Chair, likely it would depend on the project and how it's being funded, but that is something that we would look at.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mayor Ken, if you had comment on this comment.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Budget Chair. I just want to note that we as council see ones that go over, and I know we've had a few, but there is a vast majority of them that are falling within budget. I just want to highlight that we don't see those. We don't come and say the following 8 projects were all within budget. So I just want to note that there's, maybe Edward can comment, but I can't comment how many projects, but a significant portion of them are meeting within the realm that we don't need to see them. So just, Edward, make a comment on that.
Okay. So seeing that it is 9:50, I will not ask for a motion to extend. So I believe we have 3 to 4 motions that have been emailed in advance that we still have to go through, which we will not get done tonight. So rather than try and get into a debate that I think would be lengthy over any of these items, I will see if there's a motion to adjourn, which I see moved by Councillor Bondi, seconded by Councillor McGregor. So I will read our adjournment notice and then we will vote on it. So as per the public notice bylaw, Chatham-Kent Council hereby gives public notice of its intention to hold public meetings and adopt the 2025 annual budget update and pass a resolution to end council's budget review immediately following receipt of a recommended budget from the Chatham-Kent Budget Committee. Such a resolution would initiate the mayor's opportunity to veto any amendments, or where such a veto is waived, result in a final budget. The Budget Committee also gives public notice of the need to meet in closed session at any time during the budget deliberation process as permitted by the Municipal Act 2001. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none. Just as a reminder, we're at 5.09 and we will 5.11. Sorry, apologies. 5.11. And we'll see everyone tomorrow night.